Hello, gentle students, gentle readers of the novel Dream of the Red Chamber, Hongloumeng. Today is very sunny outside, so it was just too warm to wear a formal blazer. So in any case, nonetheless, I did still minimally put on a tie to give you all a bit of dignity and respect that you all deserve as fellow learners in this world. Today I would like to focus on contextualizing the novel, because people do not write in vacuums. They write, authors of great works of literature or history, they write within historical contexts. And the writer of Hongloumeng, Dream of the Red Chamber, Cao Xueqin, was writing in the 18th century during the Qing Dynasty, which was a dynastic era that was overseen, or that was ruled by a court that were Manchurian. And this court was considered by many to be one of two Chinese dynasties. It's interesting that we say Chinese dynasties, because it was one of two dynastic eras that the Han Chinese, that is the dominant racial demographic of China, considered to be ruled by a non-Chinese people. There was the Yuan Dynasty, which was ruled by Mongolians, and then the Qing Dynasty, ruled by Manchus. And I think it's important that we understand a bit of the historical context of the time within which that Cao Xueqin is writing Dream of the Red Chamber. So first off, more or less there are 15 dynasties, dynastic periods in China's long history, depending upon how you calculate the number of dynasties that have existed. Certainly there were times when there were multiple houses or clans claiming dynastic rule at the same time. But all but two of them were fundamentally the ones that are officially calculated in the lineage of dynasties by Chinese historians. All but two of them were ruled by Han Chinese. Even though we could say that some, such as the Ming Dynasty, was ruled or were ruled by clans that might not have been entirely Han racially. The history of the Qing cannot be considered outside of this issue of bias. We might even say a certain amount of cultural bias or even racial bias. From China's earliest dynasty on record, the Xia Dynasty, until the founding of the Yuan Dynasty, China's central court had been ruled, according to Chinese historians, by Han Chinese. And the idea behind many of the texts was that to be truly civilized, to be refined or cultured, one had to adopt, to conform to the Han standards of what it means to be a civilized person, to be agrarian, to be settled, and to be not nomadic. Certainly that was an important one. To be literate. In some sense, we would say to be, quote unquote, Sinicized. The Yuan Dynasty was ruled by Mongolians, by Mongols. And whatever its successes were, many of the Han Chinese never accepted the Mongols, or never fully accepted them. They were viewed largely as uncultured conquerors. There was a steady aim to remove them from power and restore China to Han rule, to a truly, quote, civilized rule, unquote. The Mongol-ruled Yuan was finally overthrown and restored to a rule by so-called Han, during the Ming Dynasty, which lasted 1368 to 1644, ruled by the Zhou family. And the Ming was the last, quote-unquote, Chinese dynasty, ruled by a family of Han Chinese origin. During the Ming, there was a conscious effort to restore the vestiges of Han cultural practice. This idea that to be truly civilized, one should be truly Han, manifested itself during the Ming Dynasty in such things as a very strong turn toward Confucianism, a certain kind of Confucianism that had been codified during the Song Dynasty, specifically Neo-Confucianism. There was this idea during the Ming that it had been restored from a quote-unquote barbarian rule. And there were a great deal of anxieties that after the Yuan dynasty, there were a great deal of anxieties that there may be a threat. There was a threat of non-Chinese, non-Han Chinese, such as Mongolians or Manchurians, who would threaten the north and perhaps conquer China again. And I just wanted to conjure one person who I think really represents that anxiety of being retaken by a non-Han Chinese group. And that was the person I'd like to conjure is a painter, one of my favorite Chinese painters by the name of Bashan Ren, which it's an interesting Chinese name. It literally means 8 big mountain man. And Bashan Ren, which isn't his real name. I mean, his real name is I think Zhu Da, and he was a Zhu. He was a member of the Zhu family, which was the imperial clan of the Ming. So Bashan Ren lived during the transition, the collapse, the transition from the Ming to the Qing, the collapse of the Ming Dynasty, and the beginning years of the Qing Dynasty, when the Manchus would take China. So just to recap this, you have this Yuan Dynasty, which is ruled by Mongolians, and then in 1368 that was ended, and we had the beginning of the Ming Dynasty, which once again was ruled by Han Chinese, and then from 1644 to 1911 there is a dynasty called the Qing, which is a Manchurian-led dynasty, and that was the dynastic clan that ruled China during the time within which Cao Shuqin wrote Dream of the Red Chamber. Bashan Ren was very young when the Manchus overthrew the Ming Dynasty. He was a descendant of a Ming prince, and he was a Ming loyalist. He followed this idea that the Ming should be restored, and he became a Buddhist monk to retreat from the new Qing Dynasty. One reason for him becoming a Buddhist monk was that when the Qing took over in 1644, they demanded that all males shave their foreheads and grow a long queue, a bianzi, or a sort of a ponytail. And this growing of a ponytail and shaving the front head in the Manchu style, shaving of the forehead and growing of the ponytail in the Manchu style, was a method of testing allegiance to the Qing rulers. If you didn't shave your forehead and grow a ponytail, then you were considered a traitor, or you were considered not loyal to the new Qing rule, and the punishment was a beheading. The only way to avoid that regulation was to become a Buddhist monk, and Buddhist monks shaved their heads entirely, and they were bald, and then they would go into seclusion. They would become recluses, so out of the political world, and they were not forced then to shave their head in the Manchu style. But Bashan Ren, his paintings reveal certain anxieties that were expressed in the transition from the Ming to the Qing. He liked to paint things like jagged stones. Stones are a popular theme in Chinese culture. They're yang. But if you have certain stones, they also have yin elements. Of course, the main character in Dream of the Red Chamber is a stone, who is a jade, who is made into a human being. And so the very idea of a stone can carry on a certain amount of significance. Bashan Ren also liked to paint angry birds, or sometimes he would paint fish looking up or down anxiously as if something might fall on them. I'm not quite sure if you will be able to see this in this film, but this is a black and white copy of a Bashan Ren painting, and you can see a stone in the water with the fish, and the fish is anxiously looking up at the stone, which the fish seems to be worried that the stone might fall upon it. Well, this really does, I think, represent Bashan Ren, represent his anxieties of this new dynastic rule and what it means for the people who are still attached to the Ming Dynasty. Well, despite the anxieties and rebellions that arose during the fall of the Ming Dynasty, the Qing, once it began in 1644, it was there to stay in China for nearly 300 years. I guess exactly 267, but for quite some time, the Qing would remain in power. This is the last of China's imperial dynasties. And after the Qing Dynasty, well, we will enter into the Republican era, the warlord era, and then we will enter into, in 1949, the People's Republic of China. Imperial China will end with the Qing. So Cao Xueqin, the author of Dream of the Red Chamber, will then be living through the last of China's imperial dynasties. The first dynasty was founded in about 221 BC, and that would be the Qing Dynasty. Qin is how it's Romanized. Well, the Qing Dynasty is notable, I think, in several ways. First, it was the last of the dynastic periods was ruled by non-Han people. There are debates, by the way, as to whether or not the DNA of Manchus is different than the DNA of Han Chinese, but I will leave those debates to other scholars. The period of the early Qing, despite these anxieties that we see in Bashan Ren, the period that will emerge after the first little period of the Qing will be one of great cultural flourishing, population flourishing. And we enter into what many scholars call the High Qing. That would be the Qing of three specific emperors, the Kangxi Emperor, the Yongzheng Emperor, and the Qianlong Emperor. These three emperors are culturally invested in refinement, in literature, in painting, art, and architecture. In fact, some time ago, I was in an American decorating store, and there were three statues there on sale. They were the statues of the three emperors of the High Qing, Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong. I still regret not having purchased them. These were father, son, and grandson. And certainly if you're a scholar or someone who has an interest in the novel Dream of the Red Chamber, one cannot escape the emperors of the High Qing because they figure very importantly and significantly into the context within which Cao Xueqin was motivated and inspired to write his novel. The dynasty was very powerful, and it was actually quite stable until, in my opinion, the West first encountered the Qing, and the West became more expansionist in the wake of the Industrial Revolution. The Opium War of 1839 to 1842 was essentially the straw that would break the back of the imperial rule, destroying the Qing's abilities to protect itself against Western imperialism. We could also note that it was during the Qing that China's sense of global dominance, its own sense of cultural superiority, grew and became quite intense, but that sense of confidence was seriously challenged. The Manchus are similar but not quite like the Mongols of the Yuan dynasty. They were farming, hunting, and a fishing people, semi-nomadic. They were not completely nomadic, such as the Mongols were. But they were certainly more martial than the Han Chinese would consider themselves. They were an equestrian people who very much practiced martial arts and riding of horses and the use of weapons. They derived from Manchuria, which is now Heilongjiang and the Jilin province, east of Mongolia. A Manchu by the name of Nurhaci created a Manchu state that was the beginning stage of what would grow into the Qing dynasty. Nurhaci, I think he lived 1558 to 1626, so he dies, of course, before the Qing is officially founded. But he created these so-called Bazu, the 8 banner armies. And these these 8 armies became the basic framework for the Qing military system, led by Manchu families. They were very powerful militaries, and these 8 banners would have an important relationship. One of the banners would have an important relationship to the Cao family that Cao Shi would be born into. Nurhaci's rule of the Manchu people marks a shift from a tribal to a bureaucratic government, and this is a stage that was helped by the creation of a Manchu writing system based on the Mongolian alphabet. Nurhaci gained power in the north and began to win victories over the Chinese, and he would subjugate these Han Chinese people by forcing them to shave their foreheads into this Manchu hairstyle. His successor was his 8th son by the name of Hong Taiji, and Hong Taiji is very much known to have been more open to Han Chinese cultural practices. He adopted to Chinese customs and institutions, and he also hired Chinese intellectuals to help him lead the Chinese that he had conquered. This was quite different than the way in which Genghis Khan imagined his rule, which was a brutal subjugation. The Manchus really were open to befriending the Han and sort of collaborating with them in founding this rule. During his reign in Manchuria, Ming generals were becoming increasingly aware of the Ming Dynasty's disintegration, and several of these Ming Dynasty military officials were defecting to serve Hong Taiji. And what happened then is, after about 10 years of successful Manchurian expansion, Hong Taiji founded a dynasty in 1636, and he called it the Qing Dynasty. Interestingly, the Ming Dynasty is comprised of 2 components: the character for sun and the character for moon, 2 things that cast light and brilliance when you see them. And when in 1636 Hong Taiji founded the so-called Qing Dynasty, he used the character Qing, which is comprised of a radical that is symbolic of water. So he's essentially creating a dynasty that is putting out the fire of the Ming Dynasty, and it also means pure. So it's the purer dynasty that puts out the flame of the Ming. So the nomenclature of the dynastic names of the name of the Qing Dynasty is, in a sense, a kind of symbolic linguistic victory over the Ming dynasty. There was a rebel by the name of Li Zicheng who built a small state just beyond the Great Wall and out of Ming reach. In 1644, he swept across northern China with several 100,000 troops, and he launched a very active propaganda campaign against the Ming, pointing to Ming excesses and cruelty. And finally, his army entered the Ming capital in Beijing without any resistance. And Li Zicheng was actually helped by Ming officials to enter into the Forbidden City. And the last Ming Emperor, Chongzhen, as popular Chinese accounts retell, he tried to summon his chief advisors who would not respond. And in his despair, he went into one of the halls in the inner part of the Forbidden City and wrote a letter, a lament in his own blood, went to a hill to the north of the Forbidden City and committed suicide. And that would be the end of the Ming Dynasty. Li Zicheng tried to found his own dynasty. He called it the, I think, Bashan Dynasty, but he was not destined to found a new dynasty, and he died shortly thereafter. But what then happened was there was another Ming Dynasty general by the name of Wu Sangui who envisioned a possibility to restore the Ming at first. That is, let the Manchurians enter into the easternmost pass of the Great Wall and let the Manchus enter and sort of pacify the turbulence inside the Ming. And perhaps, I think Wu Sangui predicted that then the Manchus would leave again and have a special relationship with the restored Ming Dynasty. But, well, what happened really was that the Manchus entered into the Forbidden City in 1644. Wu Sangui had let them in, and they decided that the Forbidden City was actually quite a nice place, and they remained there until 1911. Well, what can we say about the Qing? The Qing that Cao Shui-qin was born into. The first Qing emperor was an emperor by the name of Shunzhi, and he was a really pro-Han emperor. He encouraged Han involvement in political activities. His reign was quite short, 18 years only. He's known for his efforts to excise corruption from the bureaucracy. And in 1645, there was a decree issued that you had to grow the queue, the ponytail, and shave your forehead within 10 days or lose your head. It took the Qing about 15 years after 1644 to truly settle the south of China, which was still offering pockets of resistance. But what essentially happened then was the culture of the hierarchy within the Qing court, within the Qing state, practiced an admixture of Han practice and Manchu practice. So you often will see within the novel Dream of the Red Chamber moments wherein people will offer the so-called Manchu salute, getting down upon one knee, sort of clearing their sleeves to make sure there were no weapons, or to demonstrate there are no weapons in their sleeve, and then getting down on one knee and in a way offering a genuflection of respect. That was the Manchu salute. The population grew during the early Qing and throughout much of the Qing. Official posts did not multiply, however, so as the number of people expanded, the number of official posts did not. The exams were known to have grown more difficult since there were so many people taking the civil service exams. But the Qing intellectual milieu was very open to religious practice. The Manchu court, the Qing court, were very much, by and large, Buddhist, especially Yongzheng, who was deeply committed to Buddhism. In fact, was believed to be enlightened. Kangxi and perhaps Qianlong were less so, but very open to other religions, other intellectual practices, but nonetheless very strictly Confucian in its bureaucratic culture, very much Neo-Confucian. They erected memorial arches for women who were considered to be particularly virtuous and particularly good at practicing chastity and wifely behavior. And then the Qing was also a time of seeking for what they called intellectual truth, the so-called Kaozheng era, which was really emerged after Cao Shui-qin. But certainly they were looking for the most authentic versions of the Confucian classics, and many thought that Buddhism, when it entered into China at the 1st century AD, that it had influenced the Confucian text. So many Qing scholars thought that if you find texts that were before the entrance of Buddhism into China, then those texts would be a pure form of Confucianism. Well, just to conclude then, this Manchu rule that was friendly to Han culture, that was open to various religions, that was open to the West in a way that you see Western clocks will be featured, they will appear in the novel Dream of the Red Chamber because of this relationship that the Qing had, especially Kangxi, and then again really with Qianlong a bit, with Western missionaries who would give gifts of Western clocks to the emperors and to the elite families, the aristocratic families. You see a great emphasis on Confucian study, which you will see throughout the novel. Well, this was a time of literary proliferation, and the emperors Kangxi and Yongzheng and Qianlong will sponsor a great deal of literary projects and the writing of histories. Cao Shui-qin will be born into this time, and his family will have a very powerful connection with the Manchus and you will see that his own family connection with the Manchus and the 8 banner armies will be represented in a kind of analog within the novel Dream of the Red Chamber. Inasmuch as the Jia family will also have a very strong relationship with the Manchu court, and indeed one of Bao Yu's sisters will become an imperial concubine within the Forbidden City. So even that connection will be represented in the novel. Well, with that, I would like to wish everyone Judy Shanti Jiankang and wish you all very good health. And if you would like to know what happens in the next lecture, please stay tuned to the following post. And Ganbei.